Did you know that the average Chinese citizen saves over 40% of their income, while in the US it's less than 10%? This stark difference is not just about habits, it's a reflection of a much deeper issue within China's economy. For decades, China's economic growth has relied on one thing: saving. But in a world where consumer spending drives growth, this creates a massive problem. How can a country keep growing if its people aren't spending? And more importantly, why aren't they spending? Let's dive into the economic forces at play and see how China's reliance on saving is holding back its future growth. There are huge gaps in Chinese healthcare and social security, and the one-child policy that China held onto for so long left generations dependent on just one child to help support them in old age. So just 38% of Chinese GDP comes from its citizens buying stuff, where in the US it's 70%. That is a problem for China because it makes the country overly reliant on selling stuff to other countries, or on the construction of apartment buildings, roads, and bridges, because there comes a point where you've built too much. Or countries say, we want less of your stuff, which is exactly what is happening today. China's economic model has been driven by state-led development, which has resulted in massive infrastructure projects and an emphasis on external growth. The country has built an extensive network of roads, bridges, railways, and entire cities to modernize its economy rapidly. Over the last few decades, China has experienced impressive economic growth, primarily fueled by large-scale government investments in infrastructure and construction. However, this growth has been overly dependent on external factors. China's GDP has been significantly influenced by its ability to sell goods to other countries and by its aggressive building programs. The government has continually set ambitious growth targets, aiming for a 5% growth rate each year. But these targets have proven difficult to meet as the domestic market is not as strong as it needs to be. The issue lies in the fact that while China's citizens save more than 40% of their income, only 38% of its GDP comes from domestic consumption, compared to 70% in the US. This means that China has been relying more on exports and construction to drive economic growth rather than on its own people's purchasing power. The one-child policy has also played a role in shaping China's savings behavior. With fewer children to care for aging parents, people in China have had to save more for their retirement and healthcare costs. This historical emphasis on saving, combined with gaps in healthcare and social security, has contributed to a culture of frugality rather than consumer spending. Thus, the real challenge for China's economy today is how to shift from an over-reliance on construction and exports to a more sustainable model driven by domestic consumption. The government's success in achieving its growth targets will depend on its ability to get its citizens to spend more, which has been a difficult task given the historical and systemic factors at play. China's economic growth has relied heavily on infrastructure development, often at the cost of creating real demand within the country. The government has built vast cities, massive housing complexes, and an immense network of roads and railways. However, this rapid construction has led to a significant problem. Many of these developments are sitting empty, creating what have become known as China's ghost cities. These ghost towns are sprawling complexes with no residents. Entire cities, often built in remote areas, have been constructed in hopes that people would eventually move in. But the truth is that the demand simply isn't there. Despite all the construction, there are not enough people to fill these spaces. The government believed that if they kept building, people would come. But the reality is much harsher. People aren't moving to these areas, and the empty homes only contribute to the illusion of growth. The economic incentive for these ghost cities lies in a simple principle. When you build, money moves. The construction of new housing or infrastructure counts as economic activity, regardless of whether people actually live in those homes or use those roads. This has been an easy way for local leaders to meet their growth targets. The economy grows on paper, even though the buildings remain empty and unused. However, this model creates a fundamental issue. Building infrastructure without real demand distorts economic data. The money spent on these projects doesn't generate the kind of long-term economic growth that can sustain a country's prosperity. It's short-term growth that only works as long as the construction keeps going, but once the construction slows down, so does the growth. This system has worked for a while, but it is unsustainable. China's reliance on construction to fuel its economy is reaching its limits, and the government needs to pivot toward increasing domestic consumption to maintain long-term growth. Without real demand from the people, the economy cannot continue to grow at the pace it has in the past. Alright, so China is running out of stuff to build. What China needs to do to grow? Certainly at the same volume as the last 2 decades, literally millions of vacant housing units. Some of the biggest construction firms and home builders in the country have gone through bankruptcy in the past few years. So to keep growing at the demanded pace, China cannot just keep building. We'll sell things to the rest of the world. Could work, but China is already doing a lot of that. Countries have become much less keen to take in all the products being pumped out by China's excess manufacturing capacity. They want to build stuff too. China's reliance on external markets to fuel its economy is encountering significant challenges as global trade dynamics shift. For years, China has been a major supplier to countries around the world, but this reliance on exports is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. As other nations develop their own manufacturing capabilities, the demand for Chinese goods has started to diminish. For example, in Europe, countries like Germany are focused on protecting their domestic industries. Major companies like BMW, Volkswagen, and Mercedes-Benz employ almost 1% of Germany's workforce. These nations are invested in keeping their own industries strong, and the global demand for Chinese products is starting to face resistance. Additionally, the U.S. has become more cautious in its approach to Chinese imports, particularly with the ongoing trade war and tariffs. China is also facing growing barriers in emerging markets like India, where high tariffs are being imposed on Chinese goods, such as smartphones, solar equipment, and even toys. This means that the path for China's goods to reach global markets is getting increasingly harder to navigate. As countries around the world look to strengthen their own economies and reduce dependence on Chinese manufacturing, China's ability to sell more goods internationally is being constrained. This is forcing China to reconsider its economic strategy, especially as the demand for its products starts to slow down. The growing trade tensions and protectionist measures are highlighting the limits of China's export-driven model and signaling the need for a shift toward more domestic consumption. One of China's most significant economic challenges is its low level of domestic consumption. While other major economies like the U.S. rely heavily on consumer spending to drive growth, China's economy is built on a foundation of savings rather than spending. Only 38% of China's GDP comes from domestic consumption, compared to 70% in the U.S. This disparity highlights the issue. For China's economy to continue growing, it needs its citizens to spend more. But why don't people spend? A major factor lies in China's history of scarcity and uncertainty. For much of its history, China has faced famines, natural disasters, and periods of economic hardship. This has ingrained a deep cultural tendency to save in order to prepare for future uncertainties. The one-child policy has also played a crucial role in shaping this mindset. With fewer children to care for aging parents, individuals are left to bear the financial burden of supporting their family in old age, leading them to prioritize saving over spending. Additionally, China's healthcare system, while improving, still places a heavy financial burden on individuals. A significant portion of medical expenses is paid out of pocket, especially in the case of long-term or catastrophic health issues. This adds another layer of financial insecurity, further discouraging people from spending their money. So, while China's government has ambitious growth targets, the lack of consumer spending presents a significant barrier. Without a cultural and structural shift that encourages people to spend rather than save, China's economy will struggle to achieve the sustainable growth it aims for. To truly thrive, China needs to move from an economy dependent on construction and exports to one where consumer demand is the driving force. China's deep-rooted culture of saving can be traced back to its long history of hardship and scarcity. Over the past 400 years, the country has faced 12 major famines, each one a reminder of the precariousness of survival. One of the most devastating was the Great Chinese Famine of the late 1950s, which resulted in the deaths of at least 30 million people. This history of struggle has left an indelible mark on the Chinese psyche, fostering a mentality of caution and financial prudence. For much of its history, China has not had the agricultural abundance necessary to support its large population. The available farmland has always been prone to natural disasters, particularly flooding and droughts, further compounding the challenges of feeding the nation. As a result, the Chinese people have learned to be extremely cautious with their money, saving as much as possible to guard against future uncertainties. This mindset of saving rather than spending has only been reinforced by the one-child policy, which was implemented for over 3 decades. The policy meant that children, particularly the only child in many families, became solely responsible for the care of aging parents and grandparents. The 4-2-1 dilemma, where one child must care for 2 parents and 4 grandparents, has placed an additional financial burden on families, making saving essential for future security. In this context, saving is not just a financial choice, but a survival strategy. The historical experience of scarcity, coupled with the personal responsibility placed on the younger generation to care for the elderly, has shaped China's approach to money and consumption. Until this historical backdrop is addressed and cultural attitudes towards spending evolve, China's economic model will continue to face significant hurdles. The shift from saving to spending, a critical element of sustainable economic growth, will require both structural changes and a shift in societal values. One of the key reasons for China's low domestic consumption is the lack of accessible investment opportunities for ordinary citizens. While in many Western countries, individuals can easily invest in a wide range of assets, including stocks, bonds, and retirement funds, China's investment landscape is far more restrictive. The Chinese people have few options to invest their savings in ways that would generate long-term wealth. In the US, for example, most Americans automatically contribute to their 401k retirement plans, which invest in large, stable companies like those in the S&P 500. These investments allow citizens to build wealth over time, contributing to a culture of long-term financial planning and investment. The returns on these investments create a cycle of wealth, which encourages people to spend more, invest more, and drive economic growth. In contrast, China's financial system has limited opportunities for individuals to invest in the country's most profitable industries, many of which are controlled by state-owned enterprises, SOEs. These companies, such as major banks, energy firms, and construction giants, are primarily owned by the Chinese government, meaning that regular citizens have no means of directly benefiting from the growth of these enterprises. The wealth generated by these companies stays within the state apparatus, rather than being distributed to the public. Moreover, China's stock market has not provided the kind of growth opportunities that are seen in other countries. The country's stock indexes have remained stagnant for years, making it difficult for people to invest in a way that would help them accumulate wealth. Without these types of wealth-building opportunities, it's no surprise that many Chinese citizens continue to save rather than spend. They have no reliable way to grow their money, so they hold on to it as a form of financial security. This lack of investment options creates a significant barrier to domestic consumption. Without avenues to grow wealth, people are less likely to feel financially secure enough to spend money, thus slowing down the broader economy. To encourage more spending, China must develop a more open financial system that allows its citizens to invest and build personal wealth, much like what has been achieved in Western economies. Until these barriers are addressed, the country will struggle to transition to a more consumer-driven economy. In contrast to China's state-dominated economic model, the United States operates on a system where individuals are encouraged to invest in and benefit from the growth of private companies. One of the key features of the U.S. economy is the widespread availability of investment opportunities, particularly through retirement plans like 401ks and individual retirement accounts, IRAs. These plans allow Americans to invest in the stock market, including large, successful companies, with the promise of growing their wealth over time. For example, many Americans automatically invest a portion of their paycheck into funds that track the S&P 500, which includes the 500 largest and most profitable companies in the U.S. Over the years, these investments compound, increasing the financial security of individuals and encouraging them to spend more. The idea is simple. If people believe their investments are growing, they feel more confident in their financial future and are more likely to spend, thus driving further economic growth. This system of investment creates a cycle of wealth accumulation, which in turn fuels consumer spending. The more people invest, the more wealth they generate and the more they spend, boosting the economy. This cycle is often referred to as the wealth effect, where individuals feel wealthier and, as a result, are more willing to make purchases. In China, however, the model is very different. The government owns or controls many of the most profitable companies, leaving ordinary citizens with few opportunities to invest in these enterprises. The stock market has not provided the same level of wealth-building opportunities as in the U.S. In fact, Chinese stock indexes have remained largely stagnant for years, offering limited prospects for growth. Without a reliable way to invest and accumulate wealth, Chinese citizens tend to save rather than spend. The U.S. system allows people to directly benefit from the success of the country's biggest companies, creating a robust, consumer-driven economy. In contrast, China's model suppresses personal wealth accumulation and limits the ability of citizens to directly invest in and benefit from the growth of state-controlled industries. To transition to a more sustainable and consumption-driven economy, China will need to open up its financial system and provide more opportunities for its people to invest and grow their wealth. China's economic model has been primarily focused on state-led growth, where the government plays a central role in driving major industries and infrastructure projects. The country's remarkable economic rise over the past few decades has been fueled by massive state investments in infrastructure, building roads, bridges, railways, and cities on an unprecedented scale. This state-driven development model has allowed China to modernize quickly, becoming the world's second-largest economy. However, there is a significant flaw in this approach. The model is heavily reliant on external factors, such as selling goods to other countries and building more infrastructure, which cannot sustain growth indefinitely. The demand for Chinese products has decreased as other countries have built up their own manufacturing capacities. Additionally, China's aggressive push for more infrastructure is starting to encounter diminishing returns, with cities and developments left empty, creating so-called ghost towns. At the same time, the Chinese government has set ambitious growth targets that require continuous expansion. Yet domestic consumption, the driver of economic growth in many other economies, is low. Only 38% of China's GDP comes from its citizens purchasing goods, compared to 70% in the US. This discrepancy is a problem because it makes China overly reliant on external sales and government spending. For China to move beyond this model, it will need to shift its focus toward increasing domestic consumption. This requires encouraging the population to spend more, which is difficult in a country where saving has been ingrained as a financial strategy due to historical and cultural factors, such as the one-child policy and the need to care for elderly parents. Without a shift in economic policy that empowers individuals to spend and invest, China's growth will continue to face significant challenges. The core issue with China's economic model is that it suppresses household spending and limits the growth of the private sector, which in turn hampers the country's ability to foster a consumer-driven economy. The Chinese government has prioritized state control over many of the most important sectors, such as construction, energy, defense, and banking, leaving little room for regular citizens to invest in these industries or benefit from their profits. Unlike in capitalist economies, where individuals can invest in companies, benefit from profits, and use that wealth to increase their purchasing power, China's system prevents most people from directly participating in the wealth generated by the country's large state-owned enterprises. This has created a system where most of the economic growth benefits the state, not the people. In capitalist economies like the US, wealth-building mechanisms such as 401k, retirement plans, and stock investments enable individuals to generate passive income, encouraging them to spend more and contribute to the economy. These systems have created a cycle of wealth accumulation that fuels domestic consumption and economic growth. In contrast, China's model lacks these personal wealth-building opportunities, and as a result, the average citizen's ability to contribute to the economy through spending is severely limited. This fundamental flaw in China's economic structure is preventing it from transitioning to a more consumption-driven economy, where people's spending powers the broader market. Until China can shift more wealth to households and reduce state control over key industries, it will struggle to reach its economic potential. In China, key industries such as construction, energy, defense, and banking are primarily controlled by state-owned enterprises, SOEs. These are companies that are owned and managed by the Chinese Communist Party. Think of it like this. Imagine if the US government controlled major institutions such as JP Morgan, Lockheed Martin, ExxonMobil, and a wide range of other essential industries. This concentration of control allows the government to direct the profits and outcomes of these companies back into projects that benefit China. While this centralized model does help fund infrastructure and development, there's a significant trade-off. The profits that could potentially flow back to the people through investments or wealth accumulation simply don't reach the average citizen. In most capitalist countries, these kinds of profits would be distributed to individual investors who could use their returns to improve their personal economic situation. However, in China's system, the lack of private investment opportunities for the average person means that these returns are kept within the state apparatus, limiting individual wealth-building opportunities. While the state is reinvesting in China's growth, regular people don't have the ability to directly participate in this wealth creation process. The model limits personal agency when it comes to managing wealth and personal investment. This dynamic creates a large gap between the state's growth and the financial empowerment of its citizens. In the United States, one of the most powerful economic tools for the average person has been the ability to invest in the stock market through retirement savings plans like 401ks and IRAs. These investment vehicles allow individuals to automatically invest a portion of their paycheck into stocks, bonds, and other financial instruments, helping them build wealth over time. For example, many Americans invest in the S&P 500, which represents the 500 largest and most successful companies in the U.S. This has created a cycle where people can make money through both their jobs and their investments, leading to long-term wealth accumulation. The idea is simple: invest in profitable companies, watch your money grow, and use that wealth to spend, invest more, and build a better future. This system has led to a massive rise in stock ownership over the past few decades. In 1979, only 20% of Americans owned stock. Today, that number has skyrocketed to over 60%. This growth in investment has contributed to greater wealth creation and a consumer-driven economy where people feel more confident in spending, knowing their investments are working for them. The cycle is self-reinforcing. As people gain more wealth from their investments, they spend more, which drives economic growth. This wealth effect encourages further consumption, creating a thriving economy. The U.S. model encourages spending and investing, empowering individuals to control and grow their own wealth, something that contrasts sharply with China's system, where the state controls much of the wealth and investment opportunities are limited for ordinary citizens. China faces significant challenges as it navigates its economic future. The country's people are saving more than they are spending, which directly impacts its ability to fuel domestic consumption and drive growth. Despite the incredible infrastructure developments and economic achievements, China struggles with the fact that much of its GDP is reliant on external factors, selling goods to other countries and building more and more. For years, the government has set ambitious growth targets, but the economic model relies on pushing people to consume, despite a historical context that makes savings a necessity. With a one-child policy that has left families caring for elderly parents and grandparents with little external support, saving has become a defense mechanism against future uncertainty. The issue deepens with the limited investment opportunities available to the average person. The state controls much of the economy, and private citizens are largely excluded from benefiting directly from the wealth generated by state-owned enterprises. This contrasts with the U.S. model, where people are empowered to build wealth through retirement plans and investments in successful companies. In the end, for China to reach its full potential, it will need to find a way to shift its economic model, encouraging people to spend more while providing them with more opportunities to invest and build personal wealth. Without this shift, the tension between China and the rest of the world will continue to grow. If China can raise domestic consumption even slightly, it could balance its trade and reduce the growing friction with other nations. The path ahead is challenging, but China has the potential to evolve. Whether or not the political will exists to make these changes remains to be seen. Until then, this imbalance between savings and spending will remain a key issue for China's economic future. So this increasing tension between China and the rest of the world is not going anywhere until they can get this line to start moving up. That is the whole ballgame. Even a modest move from 38% to 48% would come close to balancing China's trade with the rest of the world. We have another big video on China coming out next. I highly recommend following China Beige Book on Twitter. It's punchy stuff, humorous. Link is in the description, and hit that subscribe button. We have so much good stuff coming up, and it's the best way to support the channel. I'll see you in the next video. See you.